It's really a great pleasure to welcome back again to Lincoln Center, Tim Burton.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So Tim, if we go back, what was that, 12 years ago, after you finished The Nightmare Before Christmas, and you looked at it, what were your feelings about that, and what kind of things did you want to continue to do in puppet animation?
Well, I mean, I just love the medium so much, and from that, was sort of interested in exploring more, trying to make something more emotional and kind of like a love story, because there's something so sort of beautiful about the technique, and so you know, the handmade quality of it, and so sort of looking for, you know, another type of project to do with that medium, and a good friend of ours, Joe Ranft, who worked on Nightmare, who's no longer with us, had told me the idea that he some old folk tale called The Corpse Bride, and that just sort of made me start thinking about, you know, just trying to make kind of like some kind of love story with skeletons.
What things technically were available to you now that weren't available to you in '93?
Well, I mean, the technique is, the amazing thing is it's the same technique. So that's like since the beginning of cinema, it's not much has really changed. I think the difference on this was the sort of sophistication of the puppets. On Nightmare, we used a lot of replacement heads for expressions. And on this, a lot of the mechanics were just built into the head. I mean, they were really beautiful works of art, these puppets. I mean, they're really amazing. How big are they? Well, they're about a foot tall, you know, the animators would have to put a wrench in the ear to make the mouths move and a wrench in the other ear to make, I mean, they're really amazing construction on these puppets. And also, too, with the fabric, you know, just trying to find, because like hair and fabric are really hard to kind of animate in this process, so trying to find the right kind of metallic fabric that would hold and still flow, and it was, you know, but everything else, you know, kind of remains the same, really.
Mm-hmm. So, what was the first step in the process? Did you have a story written out first? Did you come up with sketches, or?
Sketches, and you know, it was like, again, 10 years sort of before. And a lot of it has to do with the team. You know, it's like there was a group of puppet makers in Manchester, England, that I'd worked with, and they made these puppets and beautiful. And also, it's just getting the right team together. You know, it's still a somewhat rarefied field, and so I was lucky to kind of, you know, find a great co-director, Mike Johnson, and then we got together a nice, great team of people to kind of, you know, work in the dark for a couple of years for 12 hours a day, you know. So a lot of it has to do with just finding the right team of people.
Was it all shot in one location, one studio?
Yeah, in East London, yeah.
But the musical sequences, when did that occur to you to include that?
Well, I mean, the form of animation is such a musical. Even the way the animators animate, it's like choreography, and so somehow it always sort of lends itself to music. And you know, Danny has always been an integral part to the sort of character of the piece. And you know, when you add music to it, you know, he comes on very early, so that the animators can, obviously with the piano and the songs, all have to be done first, so that they can animate to it.
And was there a certain kind of music you were looking for? Any models of musical movies you were thinking of?
Oh, Gone with the Wind for a moment. No, you know, just Danny. You know, just, you know, I used to go see his music in, you know, in Oingo Boingo in clubs before I was ever making movies. So, you know, he kind of, you know, he's always enjoyed doing skeleton music. So that's the best way you can describe it, really.
How much more of a role did computers play in this one than, say, in Nightmare?
Not much. We really tried to keep it to a minimum. I mean, it's just really just a couple of effects, some smoke effects, and just some compositing, and because again, you know, the point of it was to keep the purest form possible that we could. So we really didn't do much at all.
Is there much other puppet animation around that you admire, or people who work in this medium whose work you can recommend?
Well, unfortunately, there's not many. I mean, it's just because it's like I've heard that Disney's closed down its cell animation program. And this sort of computers, which is nothing wrong with computers, but I think the studios have kind of relied too heavily on it just for the fact they don't. It's basically because Pixar makes good movies. It's not about computers or things. It's more about. So you hope that there are more. Open in the future to just all forms of animation.
When you were talking before about doing a story with a lot more emotion, were you worried? I mean, I find the ending incredibly moving, and were you worried that puppets could actually bear that?
Yeah, well, that was a great challenge. I mean, that was one of the things that we wanted to do, is see if we could make, puppets, emotional, and a lot had to do with the cast. I mean, we had a beautiful cast of actors, that just kind, it was a fairly low budget movie, so everybody just kind of came in and did it, and I think everybody would say voices are important in an animated film, which they are, but in this case, I felt like they really kind of came through and really added an emotional context to the characters that that helped that emotional quality that we were going for.
Okay. See if we can get some questions from our guests here. Yes.
Right before he passed away, I understand you were doing a documentary on Vincent Price. Whatever happened to the footage that you had shot, and how close were you to being there?
Let me just repeat it. This viewer said that before he passed away, it would seem that Tim Burton was making a film about Vincent Price before he passed away, and what happened to that footage?
Well, I still have it. I initially had trouble getting rights to some of the film footage and stuff, and so it kind of went on the shelf. And also, I was kind of in it, and I kind of hate looking at myself. So if I can find a way of cutting myself out of it and showing him, I'd like to kind of go back and kind of maybe revisit that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of sort of Disney references. There's that. There's instead of in Cinderella, when the birds are helping, and we use spiders instead of dressing her, and instead of Jiminy Cricket, we had a maggot as the conscience. So there were lots of Disney references.
Think people remember Peter Lorre?
Well, that's the thing. I never knew what Peter Lorre was, but that was sort of my inspiration for that. Was there were all those old Warner Brothers cartoons, and a weird Peter Lorre fish would jump out, and you go, "What the hell is that?" And so that sort of got me. I learned about Peter Lorre through those old Warner Brothers cartoons.
Yes, back there.
I like the concept that the real life was in these drab blues and grays, and the afterlife obviously was in kind of more dramatic color. But in looking at the poster, I noticed you kind of flip-flop that. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the decision.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was sort of the idea of making a lot of that has to from growing up in Burbank, that kind of feeling of sort of drab, rigid, kind of kind of repressive feeling society, versus the Land of the Dead feeling more as a sort of symbol of the sort of creative spirit and color and vibrant, and also too growing up in that culture where sort of death was always sort of a taboo subject and very dark and not to be spoken of. And there's a large Hispanic culture in Los Angeles, which celebrates the Day of the Dead in a much more humorous, skeletons in pool halls and things. And there's something that's much more feel is more beautiful and hopeful about that sort of. And other cultures have that, and that kind of dark cloud culture that I grew up in is just sort of creates this sort of climate of fear where you're just kind of worried about everything, as opposed to sort of the celebration, which just seems so much more positive way of looking at things.
Yes, sir.
What was your big break in the industry that got you there to do whatever you really wanted? And on that note, I just see so many cool young people here. I saw some girls over here drawing and really, really good stuff. And I do some stuff. I'm wondering what bridges the gap from being in the audience to breaking this
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you
The
all
law.
come up here and I'll just go sit in the audience. That would be fine with me. I'd be more than happy to trade. Well, you know, what you're just saying is I was just lucky to do what you're doing, which is draw and just keep doing your own thing. And, you know, a little bit of it's luck. I still can't figure out how it happened, you know, because I was a terrible student and a terrible busboy and a terrible waiter and a terrible, you know, pretty much everything. So, you know, it's nice to kind of just keep to your passion and just do, you know, just do whatever form, drawing, music, film, whatever. Just keep your own passions going that way.
Do you sense that there's a greater opportunity now, though, for animation and perhaps other styles of filmmaking in the industry or just around?
Well,
generally?
yeah, I mean, yeah, because now you can do movies on your own phone, I guess, I hear, you know, so, yeah. So, yes, those possibilities are there.
Let's see, some ladies. Yes.
How was your experience of making this film so close, back to back with Charlie?
Well, it wasn't back to back, it was sort of at the same time. I mean, like I said, I was lucky to have a very great co-director, Mike Johnson, who was, you know, in the dark most of the time for a couple of years, and it was a bit schizophrenic, but in some ways it was convenient because it was both were done in London, and like, you know, like with Johnny, you know, he'd be like Willy Wonka during the day and Victor at night, you know, and so. You know, the same with Helena and Christopher Lee. You know, so there was a lot of crossover that was actually sort of beneficial in a certain way. So, and also, you know, it's such a slow motion process. I mean, you know, you probably know the process. I mean, an animator might get 6 seconds, you know, or we sometimes get several seconds a week, or at most a couple of minutes a week of footage. So, you know, it's a different process.
Is there any material that will eventually be on the DVD that's not here?
Well, you don't do like take 3 and 4 with this kind of thing, with, you know. I
Any
mean,
sequences?
no. I mean, there is something that's quite nice that I hope that gets put on, which is to see the actors. I mean, it's not that we didn't do the kind of slick DreamWorks kind of where everybody's in makeup, kind of, you know, showing them doing their voices. It looks more like sort of convenience store, you know, footage with everybody looking like crap, you know, but doing the voices, and it's actually quite exciting. And there's some early tests where you see some of the armatures moving and things, which for me, it's the first time, you know, usually on DVDs there's a lot of crap, and this is probably the first one I can see that I would find interesting, you know, that there's a lot of seeing the mechanics of the puppets and all.
I'm wondering about your conception for Victor's parents. I mean, in a certain way, that seemed almost very classic cartoon for me in terms of the way that they looked and their relations and stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. You know, with like Nightmare, like for stop motion, like fantasy characters are much easier to kind of design because they're fantasy characters. I always find that human characters are more tricky because they're either kind of too realistic or whatever. So it kind of started out with sort of thinking with the Victor character. You know, I sort of went back to the first short film I did, which was Vincent, and sort of thought of Vincent grown up, kind of, and that sort of helped set the tone of how to maybe try to design, you know, some of the human characters, and actually somebody pointed out, which I didn't think about until, you know, said Victoria's father looks like the Burgermeister Burger from, so there's a little bit of Rankin and Bass in there too, I guess, you know.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Well, shouldn't you be home doing your homework? Yeah, well, I remember feeling that very much, you know, because I always remember, like, you know, you look at children's drawings and all children draw amazingly, and then you just sort of, it sort of gets beaten out of you as you get older. And I remember going through that in school, like, oh, no, you can't draw like this, you have to draw like that. And I got really frustrated, almost thinking like I couldn't draw. And I remember sitting in the farmer's market in LA one day and just being frustrated. And I almost had a hallucination where I just said, I don't care, I'm just going to draw the way I want to draw. And it was like a moment that changed my life in a certain way. And it was, so it is something, you know, there's lots of things to be learned, but there's also the thing of being, again, true to yourself. And it's a tough balance, but it's something to remember.
Yes.
Do you not like casting? You're like a real collaborator. You tend, as more than a lot of directors, you tend to latch on people and work with them again and again. Like, what is it about certain actors or Danny Elfman or whatever?
Yeah.
Finding people that you just want to stick with?
Well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with sharing a certain sensibility. I mean, you know, in every film, you never always work with the same people because you know, there's always a bit of new, you know, fresh meat or whatever, blood or whatever you want to call it. But so it's, but you know, it's nice, you know, and like people like Johnny, it's always fun because he's always liking to, you know, he's more like, you know, Lon Chaney or Boris Karloff than he is a leading man. You know, he likes to transform, and so that's fun to deal with. You know, there's something that's very creative about that process and trying to do new things with the same people that you work with. Also, sort of shorthand that helps because, you know, I do have trouble making complete sentences sometimes. So, you know, just wave your arms and they understand you, and so that's so. But, and again, on this particular case, you know, it's just I work with people that have great voices, and as I said, you know, I've worked with, you know, Johnny and Helena and Christopher Lee and Michael Goff, and but all of them, you know, you know, Richard Grant, Emily Watson, Joanna Lum, all of every voice I feel in the movie is just is amazing, you know. So they, again, I was very lucky, and we tried to keep it. You know, I think a lot of people who do animated films complain because they do take 20 and 30 and 40, and because sometimes animators, I was where there myself, you get kind of very anal about things, and you kind of have to. So we tried to keep it kind of more spontaneous and you know, so to give the performances a little bit more life in a way.
Did you ever do during the course of the filming any work with live actors to give you a sense of movements, or?
No, I mean, these guys, all we did was show them their puppets. You know, that's all, because that's all they had. So that, I think, has helped inform them of the character. But what was odd is that we designed these characters years before, you know, we cast anybody, and it was sort of weird that, you know, that the Johnny ended up, you know, looking like the Victor puppet, and you know, and you know, Albert Finney and his character and his voice just matched so perfect. You know, it's like it was a weird kind of karma that all the characters ended up kind of looking like who they were.
Let's see. So yes, ma'am. Yes, right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always doing it, so it just is, you know, I write it on scraps of toilet paper and, you know, matchbook covers, and when there's enough material, if there is enough, you know, yeah, so I always kind of doing little stories, and, you know, if there ever amounts to anything, I might do that, because I did enjoy it, yeah.
Would Corpse Bride ever be released as a book?
No, I think what we're going to do is just kind of, because the process of making it such a beautiful process, and there's so many great artists that work on it. I mean, really, you know, the animators, the sculptors, the puppet makers, everybody is, that's the beauty of it. You know, you're in the movie industry, but then at the same time, this kind of brings you back to realizing you're still working with an art form. So, you know, we might just do a book showing the kind of process of it, which I think I find interesting, and, you know, sort of shows the artists at work.
Yes, back there. Yes, ma'am. Right.
No, as I said, what I was saying was really it's the artistry of the way these puppets were built, and like I said, if you opened up, you know, took off their faces and saw what was underneath there, I mean, it's it's like a, you know, it's like a human, it's like an android, it's like a robot. I mean, they really, and again, it's something that we were going for, and I think some of my favorite moments are just when the close-ups and the characters are looking at each other and just the slightest eye movement, which, you know, just makes it so real and beautiful. And like I said, if you saw these puppets and touched them, they're just so beautiful and tactile. I mean, I almost wish I had one here. I should have carry it with me always.
Yes. Yes, right.
A Nightmare Before Christmas, Henry Selick got the sole director credit. But on this one, you share the credit with Mike Johnson. How is this one more of a collaborative effort?
Well, the easiest way for me to sort of explain that is that Nightmare for me was a much more completed, you know, completely fully designed. You know, it was something that was so clear in my mind, and it was so sort of fleshed out in a way that you know, I didn't feel like there was any variance for, you know, it just was very clear. And in this case, it was a much more organic process. It was much more, I mean, we were kind of working on things all the way through and adding shots and writing things all the way through. And so since it wasn't sort of based on something that I had sort of originated like Nightmare, it was just a feeling of wanting to feel a bit more sort of involved, because it was a much more sort of organic process, this particular project.
Yes, sir.
Is the actual directing process easier or harder when you do something as far as stop motion as opposed to real thing? Like, you know, as far as lighting goes, where you want a character to be, how you want them to move.
Well, I mean, obviously, just live action is more immediate, so the decisions have to be a lot quicker. You know, I mean, it's more spontaneous. Obviously, you know, puppets just don't jump up and you know, it would take you know 6 seconds, you know, for a guy to scratch his ear. You know, take a week to do. You know, so it's a slightly different process, and also, you know, obviously with animation you storyboard it. So you know, between Mike and I, you look at the storyboards, and so it's much more sort of planned out in a way. So it's just that's really the difference. I mean, you know, and the other thing is you don't do take 2 and 3. I mean, you hope to get the shots. Maybe, I don't know, maybe reshot a couple of shots, but you know, it's. But besides that, it's like, you know, you build sets and it's lit, and I think that's what gives it the sort of simple power that it has. So in that way, it's like a live action film, but just in real slow time, you know.
Was it all originated on film, on 35?
Yeah, but you used digital cameras, which helped with that was the other thing that helped with the animators. They could track their shots a little bit easier. That you know, they could see where they were going with it a bit more, as in the old days where you just do it and, you know, take it to the lab and see, you know, oh shit, what happened yesterday? What happened? So it was easier to track. So that was a slight advancement.
Let's see. Yes, over here.
I realize that we want to can't say parents and Victor can't say nerd. I was wondering if there's a word you back away from these days.
Well, both of those are pretty good ones. Yeah. Yeah. That's why they're there, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, right.
So you've got this great emotionally resonant story and catchy numbers, and it's incredible. What if someone came up to you and said, "Hey, how about First Fred the musical?" You wanted to put that
But I think that's a problem right now, is that there's too many, you know, it's like, you know, when Harry met Sally the musical, Sleepless in Seattle musical, you know, Stealth the musical. You know, I mean, that's the problem, I think, that, you know, yeah.
Let's see. A couple more. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, how do you usually choose to do stop animation instead of usually just drawing animation? Like, why do you choose puppets versus just
Well, I mean, a lot of it really, stems from growing up in the love of, Ray Harryhausen movies, or every Christmas watching the Rankin and Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. There's something, again, that's very primal about that form of animation, and I just always, I mean, that's why I did Vincent that way, and there's just something about that I find, again, just an amazing process. I mean, I think all forms are valid, and they can all be beautiful, but this one for me just has I just have a particular love for it.
I noticed that Victor plays Harryhausen pianos.
Yeah, well, it was like a few months ago, we were into the production, and Johnny and Helen and I went over to Ray's house in London and met him for the first time, and he's such an amazing man, and still, the amazing thing is that he's still not doing it, because he's still, vital and interested and amazing, and then, he went out to the set and visited the animators on Corpse Bride, and I think production ground to a halt that day, because, people had been in the dark for like 2 years, and then all of a sudden, this Ray Harryhausen coming. It's like it was. I don't think much work got done that day.
Yes, right there. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know. It's a great book, and yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Time for a couple more. Yes, gentleman was behind you. You had your hand up. Yeah, right.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I always felt grateful for my, an animation background, because it's basically film. I mean, and the great thing about why I felt lucky with it is that you'd have to draw the characters, draw the sets, do the storyboards, shoot it. So you almost got the complete kind of filmmaking experience, and also composition. It teaches you. So I thought, for me, it was a much better sort of complete film background than if I'd just gone to like normal film school, and so I think you're right not to sort of separate it, because it's all kind of the same thing in a way.
Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Sorry?
Question about the David Copperfield Dickensian environment.
I thought you meant David Copperfield, the magician. I was thinking, what the hell was that? I didn't remember that reference. Well, I mean, that sort of represented that sort of rigid, bureaucratic, repressed society, which we wanted to play against with the, Land of the Dead.
Yes.
No, I don't write. I'm not a musician, so I mean, we've worked together enough. So he like I said, he comes in very early on a project like this, and he gets it. I mean, like I said, that's why I love working with him. And like I said, he was doing, skeleton music back in clubs in the, late '70s. So.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Tim, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming. Thank you
as
very
well.
much. Thanks. Thank you.